I will be talking about what I have been calling this causal data science. And alternative title to the talk would be, I think, is on the causal foundations of data science. I think it's kind of intrinsically related, and I think it's very good for the venue that is interested in the foundations of whatever data science would mean or could mean that is still open, or still being defined in some sense. If you're interested in discussions about causal inference on Twitter, check me out. That there's a lot of good stuff going on there, and not so good as well. I'd like to start with some kind of aspirations and challenges of model data science as collected in 19. You have this by Hal Varian, chief economist at Google, and professor in Berkeley, saying the ability to take the data, to be able to understand it, to extract value from it, to visualize it, to communicate it, that's going to be hugely important in the next decades. And then he goes on to say that in the future, high school students will have this type of skills. Now high schools start having even skills in calculus. More people that studied here probably got in high school. And this will be part of the toolbox or part of the education that you teach the next generation. Now we have another quote by Gary King, political scientist and statisticians in Harvard, saying that big data is not really about the data, and I would say data science as well. It was quite ironic. And then we have Yuda Pro, professor at CS and Stats at UCLA, saying data science is only as much of a science as it facilitates the interpretation of data, a two-body problem connecting data to reality. Then we have kind of interesting quotes that the first one is saying data, and data in some way. It's all about the data. The second one is saying not about the data. And the third one you have, no, it's not about either, it's about the connection between them. And I would like to try to realize that and say how this shows up in the research, modern causal inference type of research. And that's all beautiful, but I would like to then give some quotes or some kind of headlines of what's going on from the trenches, from reality. This is a quote that I got from CNN saying that study heavy coffee drinking in people under 55 linked to early death. That's a good one. I love it because in some way you want to make the causal statement, but you are a little bit scared to do it because people will kind of hammer or go strongly against you. Then you will kind of be like loyally kind of writing that you say link to. It's a way of, if you say that's association, some people would say don't care. Causation, someone will hammer you. Then you are kind of, oh, no one can do anything against me. I'm kind of suggesting, but I didn't say it. Then it's a good one. Then you have these annals of internal medicine saying some kind of more subtle message about the relationship of coffee consumption with mortality. We go on, something more interesting to me, for the kids drink responsibly, and this seems to be a pretty bad piece of news, saying that alcohol causes 20,000 cancer deaths in the US annually. Seems to be devastating. Then you have something kind of more soft or nicer, saying that one drink of red wine or alcohol is relaxing to circulations, but 2 drinks are stressful. Then it seems that there is some kind of silver line or some kind of threshold. And then you have the good piece of news that why do heavy drinkers outlive non-drinkers? Then I could go on and on. This is just another one, the last one from the New England Journal of Medicine about this kind of nuts, literally, about the association of nut consumption with total and cause-specific mortality. This is all over the place. There is huge implications for whatever we do in our daily lives. This is just in the domain of public health or somewhat medicine. We can go on to the economics as well, that people is discussing about public schools versus charter schools. And in science in general, are trying to find, underlying this problem is some type of search for some causal and effect relation. And the good question here is like, how could this be happening that every maybe X amount of years, let's say 2 years, we have some type of flip in the conclusion of these studies? I'm just getting from the news. This is the New England Journal of Medicine in particular, not from the news. This is the best, if you are a CS or a statistician, this is the best journal that you can find in the medical domain. In other words, the best and the brightest are working this type of problem, and every 2 years or 3 years, we have some kind of change in a fundamental conclusion of how should you drive our lives. Then the question is like, what's going on here, or how could this be happening? My hypothesis, and what we'll pursue today, is that there is some type of mismatch between the type of data that we are collecting and the type of statements that we are trying to make about this data. And then we would like to understand this, I would say, tension or struggle, and see how can you restore it. That's kind of the goal, or I would say the goal of the field in general, of causal inference. Then I will do that through two different tasks. The first, the general one is would like to develop machinery. What I mean by that is like language, conditions, and algorithms for performing these two tasks. One is learning about population-level interventions by cohesively combining multiple heterogeneous data sets. The reference that I like, that's kind of summary of maybe the last 10 or 20 years of research in the problem, is this causal inference and data fusion problem that appeared in PNAS in 16. Multiple papers related to that, but I will recommend this one. Also, the other task that is very different is about deciding individual level treatments by leveraging the population level data. Then there is also some type of tension between how to move from population kind of statements that are related to this public health and economics, and how to go to individual level. If you are curious, ask about that. I don't know how much time I'll have for this one, but it is not just a provocative. It's not provocative at all, but for some people, it is not only to add more covariates and say that I have this huge set of features and I will be able to claim that it's individual. That's not really what individual means. But anyhow, let's avoid the distraction here, the tangent. Then this will be our goal. The quick observation here, in order to understand what I'm talking, is people is very excited about data. Even there is this name, data science. The data is even in the science now. The key observation is like all data is not created equal. What I mean by that is like there is a lot of data out there, and I'm very excited about it. But this is almost invariably, the data is almost invariably collected under different experimental conditions. The underlying populations are different. The sampling procedure is not randomized. The treatment assignment is not randomized. Many variables are not measured consistently across data sets. We have different columns. In other words, the data collected is messy, or very messy, and rarely perfectly match the inferential target. Yeah. The positive, if it seems to be not good, the positive, like all these dimensions are now formalized. Computer science kind of way, we have a formal language to talk about data collections that lives in this space. And also there are conditions and algorithms to decide or to see what is entailed from a certain data collection. Let me just give a slightly less abstract example, still abstract. Suppose that the target here, the target quantity or query that you have is P star of y given to x. Other notations, Py sub x, depending on whatever, the way that you would like to write. But I'm trying to talk about the causal effect if you do the intervention on x. How this variable y will react, the outcome variable y. Obviously, this is different than the P star of y given x. That is the association between x and y. I will assume that people here is familiar with this tension between these two quantities. Now, assuming that we have these different data sets, I mentioned these different dimensions. I said the dimension one, the populations are different. The first data set, we have the data set in LA. The data is coming from LA population. The second data set is coming from New York, and so on. Second dimension that I mentioned is like the assignment mechanism is not randomized. How people, which kind of treatment people get was not necessarily randomized. For example, in the New York data set, we have data that is observational. Then a kind of passive data collection that we did through some type of sampling. Let's say random sampling, even in this case could be. Not really, but I'll talk soon. In this data set, in the first one, we do have randomized data. It's experimental. And important to know what was randomized. Here, what was randomized is this variable z1. Note that the goal was not to make any statement about the effect of z1, but we are trying to make the effect of the drug x. For example, x could be cholesterol, z1 could be diet. Then we cannot randomize cholesterol. There is no way that we can open the patient, throw a dice with 60 levels of cholesterol, and fix the cholesterol of the patient. Still, there is meaning in saying what's the effect of cholesterol on heart failure. This kind of seems a meaningful kind of quantity to study scientifically. Still, we cannot do it, but this data set here is giving the information about randomization on diet, Z1. That's good. This is second dimension. What is the type of treatment assignment? If it's randomized observational, randomized, what you randomize. The third one is what the type of sampling you have. Perhaps you have a random sample that is coming from the Texas population, but in the, let's say, in the LA population, you have some kind of selective pressure on age. Perhaps people that is, perhaps the data that was collected from calling landlines, but people, I don't know, under 40 or even more, they no longer have landlines. People just have cell phones. Then you have an overrepresentation of people that is older in the data set in LA. And this is the third dimension. And the fourth one is about what is measured. Measurements are not consistent. Perhaps you have this time series data. You have different points of the treatment, X1, X2, and so on, and Y1. Here we just measure X1. In this one, we are able to measure X1 and X2. And you have this kind of inconsistency across the columns of the data set, if you're thinking data oriented. Then those are the dimensions that you have. Now, it will be nice to try to put these dimensions in some type of context, what it means in terms of what we already did in our lives or in humanity, I would say. Then I will list just quickly some common inferences in scientific circles, including AI, machine learning. Then we have these tasks. The first one, it sounds funny to write in this way, maybe amused, but you'll see why I'm doing that. You have the usual, the most traditional statistics that is descriptive, if you teach statistics 101. And the most important goal there is trying to move from samples, I'm calling from the observational distribution, to the distribution itself. That's the main task in statistics, descriptive statistics. And we have huge history here from Bernoulli, Kogomorov, and we can go even before, about this arrow here. How can you guarantee something about this underlying truth if you just have data, the data collected from that? Then you have this p-hat distribution. All, at least for me, results that matter or important ones are something about the distance between this p and p-hat. This is statistics. And now it can be more sophisticated, but still, that's the fundamental part. Maybe in depends on how you count history, but in the 30s or 20s, 1920s, we will have statistics that is more experimental. A new kid or a new animal in the zoo. Now we are trying to do inferences from sample, but from sample following Fisher's idea, from randomize, when you start flipping the coin to decide what is the treatment that people will get for the crops in reality, the pesticides, of how you put pesticides in the soil. Then you have samples from the duets, and you are trying to make an inference from this distribution duets. A lot of work here. This is just some of the authors. Still, note that in this two, that is more classic type of stats, you are moving from samples to distributions. Now, around the 1970s, we start having a new problem that people are very interested, that is about what's called causal inference from observational studies, in which now we are no longer trying to move across samples to distribution, but we are trying to move across distributions. Now we have why? Because sometimes it's very hard to get experimental data. And there are all other problems that I will mention some of them later, related to transportability. That is something that I like, that I worked many years. But point being that different type of task, how can you move across distributions, assuming that we have some, for example, if you say that you have this distribution here, you already did some step moving from the sample to the distribution itself. Now, this is my reading of history. Don't shoot, but I would say that causal inference, or CI, I would say sometimes, CI from 74 to 2011 was mainly concerned with the distance between these two distributions, not about the samples, confounding the P of y given to x minus P of y given x. That's called confounding bias. And essentially, I put code here, we essentially solved by, and then I put many names here. There are the guys that work in these foundations of what causal inference will be, or under what formal way of computer science way or statistics, like under what conditions can you do this jump. You have 0 data points about this distribution, and you have infinite data about this one, because it converges the P and P hat, the distance is 0. Now how can you move from this guy that's completely different from this one? You go to these references, and they give some kind of good idea about how to do it in a fundamental way. In practice, a normal question here, what about in practice, Elias? That's why it's so hard, or why you put this in the news? all sorts of problems will compound with that. But theoretically speaking, or in the principal way, we understand how to do it. That's good. Now, the question that, another question that I usually get is like, Elias, are you saying that we are done? This seems to be a pretty good picture. Then why just don't go back to Brazil and enjoy your caipirinha or something like that, right? Have fun. What are you doing for your life? And the other one is like, this sounds like, given the codes and the dates that I'm putting in the names, this sounds old stuff. Where does causal data science, sounds some fresh, comes into play? Then I'll try to answer that. What I did is like just replace here and put our 4 dimensions. I would like to parameterize this problem, these tasks, in terms of the dimensions: populations, observational, experimental, what is the sampling, and which kind of data you collected, which variables you collected. And now let's just parameterize that. Then this is whatever. For example, let me pick this one here. Then we're saying that D1, that is the type of population, is the same. The sampling is the same. In other words, is a random sample in some way, or is exactly the population that you want. What you measure is the same. The only thing that changes from observation to do. And then you have the same 2 others. Now let me copy this guy. Oh, do these dimensions exhaust all possible data collections? The same question. Now I just copy the guy and put the first. Let me show you another task that doesn't match that. What I like to call experimental inference. That's a generalization of something called instrumental variables. You probably heard. The setting is, this has been studied in some way by Philip and Cyril Wright. There's father and brother. We have data from the do-z distribution, as I mentioned before, and you would like to make inference about the do-x. How can you do that? I'll talk a little bit more about that. Another problem, selection bias. What I mean by that, again, what I said, you have selective pressure on age, and you would like to make a statement as if you have a random sample. That has been studied. This is a guy called James Heckman in Chicago. I was in the Midwest. I have good conversations. He's a Nobel Prize winner. He showed around this time that was possible to get a data collection that was biased in this selection way, and he covered it under some very specific assumptions, but still, he showed the feasibility of doing this move, and this led to a huge amount of work. Then that's great, congratulations. I have another problem that's called in the science external validity. In machine learning, it's called generalizability. It's a key one. I like to call it transportability. The type of inference that we care about is like changing the first dimension. I didn't mention here, this is very related to dimension 2, obviously. This is dimension 3, this is dimension 1. That perhaps you are collecting data over bonobos and you like to inference about, not that we don't care about them, but in reality we are trying to learn about us. Then you like to make an inference about Homo sapiens. Huge semi-formal literature in the sciences about that, but still, there are some work there in the quasi-experimental design book. Then that's nice. This is some type of basis for the data collections. I would say that special cases of these dimensions have been studied in the literature, mostly in isolation, the way that I put here, and under very special parametric conditions. In practice, they appear together in what I'm trying to call now causal data science. Then you have a collection of data sets in this space, and you have some kind of target data set. That's good. Now, what I will do is the following. I'll get one of these tasks, I'll try to discuss a little bit or show about what I mean by this arrow here, given that it's very abstract at the moment. Let's try to ground the discussion. And I'll talk about the transportability dimension that is related to extrapolation and robustness of causal claims. The research question that we are interested in, is it possible to compute the effect of a treatment variable or decision variable X on outcome Y in a target environment pi star, target population pi star, where no experiments can be conducted, using experimental findings or experimental data from a different population pi. Now we explicitly have the idea, I have a source population pi and a target population pi star. In the source, bonobos, I can conduct experiment. In the target, Homo sapiens, we cannot do experiments. Now the question is under what conditions, is it possible? Sometimes it's possible. For sure the work in the theory or methodology, like I try to understand under what conditions this is possible. Now let me give an example. But this is very related to what we do in the lab. When you move knowledge from the lab to the real world, usually lab, this is baby place, small place that you have these variables here, X, W, and Y, and Z. And in the lab, you can do whatever you want. You can knock out genes, you can turn the system upside down, and you can learn causal effects there. But the challenge, like, we don't care about the lab. We care about outside the lab. Now the question, like, what's the relationship between the lab and outside the lab? First hypothesis, by the way, every time following the kind of standard definition in causal inference, every time that I look at a graph like that, I'm seeing this collection of mechanisms. It's encoded, a coarse representation of this collection of mechanisms, which means that there is some kind of underlying f sub z here that is assigning value to the variable z. There is a function f sub x that is assigning value to the values to the variable x, and so on, including the randomness there, sometimes a source of variability. Now, the first hypothesis that you can have is that these mechanisms are the same in the lab and outside the lab. F of z is equal to f of z star. F of x is equal to f of x star. F of w is, and so on. Then if that's the case, this is, everything is assumed to be the same structurally in this underlying thing, it's trivially transportable. You just get the result from the lab, and it will hold outside the lab. This is kind of a joke, my way of saying. Never happened. It's the dream scenario that is never the same. But whatever, this is a border case. The other case that is the nightmare scenario is that everything in the lab is different than whatever is going on in the lab and outside the lab. Now, I'm adding some annotation here. Now I'm adding these yellow arrows. Yellow arrows now are encoding what is shared or not shared across lab and outside the lab, source and target. Now every time that, as usual in graphical model, the assumptions are not in the arrows. The assumptions are in the missing arrow. Now every time that you remove an arrow, you are making a statement about some type of strong structural invariance. But here there is no missing yellows, which allows that f of z is different than f of z star. F of x is different than f of x star, and so on. Now, if that's the case, some people think that this is a hard example. That's very easy from the theoretical perspective. Everything is assumed to be different. Nothing can be learned from the lab, obviously. Now, those are two extremes. In reality, there is, and literature was oscillating between these two a few years back. Or you are completely disconnected and assume that everything is the same, or you're just pessimistic and say, let's go home, nothing can be learned. Or I need to do experiment in pi star, this is what they'll say. In reality, things are more subtle than that. Then our goal here will be, can you understand, or you can go to this spectrum? Let me show you an example what could be in the spectrum. Not everything is the same, not everything is different. Research question, what can experiments in LA tell us about New York City? Then you have the source pi LA, target New York. Now we have this representation here that's encoding X treatment, Y outcomes, Z is a set of covariates. Here in this case is age. Now we have the assumption that there is a missing yellow arrow here pointing to Y, which means that we are making a super strong assumption, but we believe that biology is the same across LA and New York, believe it or not, and f of Y is equal to f of Y star. And we don't know anything about the Z. Perhaps the age distribution may be shifted. People in LA is younger than people in New York. Perhaps they are going to, I don't know, not explain, but the f of z is different, and the f of x is different. There is a different attitude towards taking the drug in LA and New York. That's our qualitative understanding of the problem. We have we have two pieces of data. This is quantitative. In the left side, we have the experimental study in LA, which means that we are able to randomize. We spend your $5-10 million, and you are able to sample and end up learning about this distribution P of y given to x comma z. The effect of the drug x on y for each age group z. In New York, you cannot conduct the experiment, then you just have observational data P star of x, y, z. By the way, it turns out that given that you have this z that is different, this is a side note here, this guy here, P star of z is different than Pz implied by this different mechanism. This will pop up in the data. If you are trying to do some type of structural learning that we will try eventually, maybe Caroline can help, this is a kind of clue of what could be learned. What could be helping to learn where is this yellow folks. Okay, input, we have qualitative overlapping between the two causal systems in the source and the target, and you have two pieces of data, experimental and observational, and what's the goal, what we need, or want, I would say, we want to compute P star of y given to x, the effect of the drug on the outcome in New York. It turns out that in this setting, there is an answer. The answer is I learned that for more 200 years, people not in this syntactic form, but this is the way that they write it. we'll get, for each age group, we'll get the effect of x and y, p of y given to x from the source, from LA that's coming here. And then we'll weight this to account for the differences by the p star of z, the new age distribution. Then this is the recipe of how to combine the data. And this turns out to be the effect of x and y in the target in New York.
Is this like important sampling?
Yeah, it looks like important. I don't like to say that it is, but it has a very similar syntactic form. But yeah, you could use, eventually implement, if you want to estimate, you can use important sampling to evaluate this expression. But I'll show you why I don't like it. But yeah, in practice, it could be used. It's more subtle in some way. But I will get back to that. Usually I like to call this formula another name that I don't like, but you find in the literature, eventually this is recalibration. Yeah.
But in that case, you need to know certain things about P stars and the Ps.
Right. Some people like to call this recalibration. I don't like it. It is true. You can again, it's a possible name, but I don't like it's overloaded because there is different meanings and it comes from different contexts and just add confusion. I like to call the transport formula. But it is essentially a functional that you move from the distributions that you have to the target quantity. In this case, we have two distributions, P3, the observation distribution in the source, the do distribution in the source, and the observation distribution in the target. But now the question, this is the beginning of the work on that, we found this guy here. And the question then is this kind of universal? Is it a universal law of the data science? In other words, for any data set in the world, if I want to compute the effect of x and y in the target, I always use this recipe and I will do important sampling and do this combination, or perhaps this is not always true. It turns out not to be universal, not explicitly, but as used in the literature for 200 years, I would say. The demographer gave the reference for us on that when we were in the reading group when I was a PhD student. But then I was just copying here the same graph, z to x and y and x to y. I added just one more bit to make it realistic. I added this dash bidirected arrows. What it means that there is a latent variable here, or the source of exogenous variations of x and z are correlated. There is uxz affecting both x and z. There is another source of correlated uxy here that affects both x and y. This is just more realistic, because if you didn't have, at least for this problem, if you don't have latent confounders, you don't even need to conduct the experiment. I could just use the observational data. Then the whole goal, or the whole thing that we are conducting experiment is because we have these confounders, unobserved confounders. But anyhow, I'm copying here the LA and the New York data set that I have in the previous slides. It turns out that even when you have these confounders, this is the same recipe that you use to combine the data. Now I would like to do just one bit of modification, and I would like to say, with the same data set, but let's do a relabeling, and let's call Z now some proxy for this original age. Let's call this language skill. And then let's see that it's always the case, someone messed up in the data collection and they don't measure age, but they measure the language skill. Now the question is, how do you combine these different data sets in order to answer the P star of y given to x? And I'll not do the game here, given that I'm tight on time, but if you think for 2 minutes, you'll see that this universal formula here, supposedly, allegedly, is not true. And the way that you can see that, given that we have graphical model folks here, that whenever you, in some way, whenever you condition on z, we are kind of opening the path between this square. In reality, this is the disparities that we're encoding, the source of heterogeneous variations. Then when you condition on z, this is a collider, you are opening this s, z, age, y here. Then we are injecting heterogeneity, and we are kind of destroying the consistency of our estimator. And it is marginally independent already, the s from the y, given that this is a collider. Then the correct way of combining the data is to ignore the data that you have in the target, and P star of y do x is equal to y do x. And it's first example that we show that this is not universal. You can go on. Both z's here are pre-treatment. They comes before x. There is some type of fetish about variables like that. You can ask me more about. But also suppose now that we have a variable that's a post-treatment variable, that x is the treatment and z is someone affected by x, and then you have that is a biomarker, and y is affected by the biomarker. Now the question, same. What is the transport formula? How do you combine these different data sets? It could be the same, just relabeling and do the discretization in the correct way. How do you combine the data in order to get the query or the quantity star y do x? It turns out that it's neither A, if you think, nor B is a different way of combining that the weighting factor, if you want, is the conditional, is related to this family here, is the conditional P star of Z given X. Now, this leads to the lesson, that is the important thing in, here, that is like causal assumptions are required since the data doesn't impose enough constraints over the causal structure. I mean, these same data sets here could be compatible with any of these structures. And the results are structure sensitive. We just showed that depending on the structure, I have a different way of combining the data. Then now we would like to understand better about this assumption of how to encode or how to reason with this type of knowledge or invariance. Then this leads to a decision problem. The problem is the following. We have a triplet. The query is P star of y do x. We have some type of knowledge encoded in the causal graph that is the overlapping between the graph in pi and pi star. And you have these different data sets. Now the question that we have is like based on the current knowledge about the problem that is encoded in the model, causal model, and the available data sets, number 3, is the research question, P star y do x, transportable? Transportable here means computable even, or consistently estimable. And then you have a yes or no solution. If it's yes, it means that you have this mapping across distribution. In this case, turns out to be a yes. This is the last example that I show in the slides, that have this weighting here. No answer, it means, I'll show the theorem. There's a theorem. Now I would like to be general. I will not parse all the bits here of the theorem, but the idea is like, let me just read it quickly, but a causal quantity Q is transportable from pi to pi star. There's a if and only if condition. There exists some type of reduction in this calculus, it's like integral calculus, to an estimand that is a function of the observed distributions. Idea, we have a causal model here. This is another one. I have the query quantity P star of y given to x, and then you can start trying to do some reduction in this language or in this calculus, and until you find an expression here that is a function of the data from the source distribution, the source domain, do, and the observational one in the target. I'm not doing the derivation here, given that I'll not do it in a moment. Now, let me just try to explain the meaning of that. What it means to be transportable, you have the space of all possible causal models in the white, and now we have the possible causal models. That the blue one is the causal models that are compatible with whatever assumptions you have in the causal model G, in the causal graph. Now we have all other set of models that could be inducing the observed distribution. We observe 3 different types of distributions in this particular instance: PV, P star do V, and PV given to X. Those are all the models that could be inducing these guys. Now, mean transportable, it means that all of these underlying models that you don't have access have the same P star of y given to x. Now, just in words, formally for any 2 causal models that are encoding this unobserved nature N1 and N2, they have the same causal graph G that is input for these 2 nature, the same skeleton. They generate the same distributions. In other words, the model 1 generates P1V that is equal to P2V, P star 1V is equal to P star 2V, and so on. And they agree in the P star of y given to x. Then this is the case that you say, oh, this is transportable. This is the case that you can find this reduction. Then I usually say that this is the type of statement I say don't care statement, because we don't care exactly what is this unobserved structure of models or the causal model, because all causal models are agreeing with the answer, the query that you have. Then that's the idea. Now let me show what could be whenever this doesn't work, or the other part of the theorem. Now here you got a positive answer when you measure W. Suppose that you don't measure W. The same causal model compatible with the same phenomena, you just forgot W for some reason. Now the question is like P star of y do x. Is it transportable? It turns out the answer is no. Which means, in reality, there is these 2 unobserved natures, N1 and N2, that whatever I'm writing here, that is the true mechanisms. This is compatible with the data, such that they have the same causal graph, they generate the same observed distributions, but they disagree in the y given to x. Then it means I cannot commit, because the data plus the model is not rich enough to constrain the guy. It's not, the solution is not unique. Then you need to do something else. Now, just pictorially, we're just saying that they don't agree. There are some models that generate different dual-x distribution than others. A lot of my research in the last years is very interested in these instances here, the negative instances. Because negative is some type of universal, kind of central limit theory that we never get, it's not consistent. But question like, what can we say, or how can you go around that? Anyhow, no claim about the target lesson, no claim about the target effect can be made in the target, a la CLT, regardless of how much data of the observed distributions are collected. At least not in a principal way. This is the first, by the way, I just gave the result. This is a theorem, a characterization theorem about under what conditions algebraically we can transport. More 3 or 4, I'm going there. Now we also have an algorithm. Usually people don't want to do the calculus by hand, even though it was originally derived like that. Now we can have an algorithm that will input any causal diagram or any shape and form, and you return the transport formula. Usually the examples that I gave so far are kind of toy examples that you used to do by hand or discuss the concept. In reality, this is a current project related to the lung diseases. The things are much messier than the examples that you show. Still, that's the result, or what we're trying to get is automated transportability analysis in these larger scale settings. Quick note here about randomization. Also, this is kind of conclusion of these results, is like people would believe that we have this gold standard, this is the solution for all possible problems. What the gold, and this would be the world before randomization, that we have z being different here, and they have these latent variables. Randomization is allowing us, if it works, is unconfounding x with the other variables. I'm removing everyone that is related to x. But still, there is an impossibility here in terms of randomization, because the source of heterogeneity is still connected with y. We don't have a way of disconnecting that. Then this is the smallest example that we show that even when you have a randomized experiment, it still cannot take for granted that you can use the result in the target population, given that this guy here, the S or the square, is not separable from y, no matter what. Then it is ironic in the sense of some people is doing randomization for maybe 50 years, believing that they don't need to engage. Oh, let me read it. Let me follow the script. Even if you have a perfect RCT, one still needs to go through a transportability or causal inference exercise. This type of theory is unavoidable, which is the irony, because the whole goal of running the experiment was to avoid to engage in some type of modeling. Yeah.
Just to understand this in words, pardon me for dumbing it down. But what you're saying is that sort of when you do randomized control, effectively sort of, let's say, an attribute like age, its impact on sort of deciding sort of who gets what treatment or sort of what intervention, you're sort of removing that. However, the outcome may depend on sort of that confounding factor. And so classically, you're trying to sort of compute in some sense conditional distribution of y given x. But there is a sort of a question of sort of getting z in conditioning as well.
Yeah, but so far so good. Let me just add a little bit more. That's perfect. The point is, yes, in principle, condition on z, doing the reweighting, the one important sampling kind of solution, could be the solution, because if you have this, but the example is crafted to show there is an unobserved variable between z and y. Then if you try to do that, it still doesn't solve the problem, because if you didn't do the condition on z and just get the marginal thing, we know that the heterogeneity is going from this guy S to z to y directly. Then they are already different distributions. Now people could say, let me do important sampling. That is this kind of reweighting of the more classical way. Now, whenever you condition on z, you have this path open from z to s, then this is connecting through this arrow here to y. Then it's not blockable. There is no way of blocking the path. Then this is a negative instance that, in other words, if you wanted, you can craft these two examples. There exist two models, N1 and N2, such that they will match the observed distributions, the two, the observational in the target and experimental in the source, and still they will give different answers to the target. Then we cannot take for granted even the randomization when it works. It's, that's the lesson. Or the makes sense? It's, Okay, now I'm done with transportability, and I think I have 1 more minute. What I want to do, I just want to, this is my second last slide, talk what I have been thinking in general. And also because I have a postdoc available. If you have bright MIT students here, I would like to compete or to get people. They are doing good stuff. The idea is a 20,000 feet view of what we're doing. The main observation that's quite simple is that there is this collection of mechanisms underlying the system that's called the structural causal model. That is here, some type of blueprint of DNA of what's going on in the system. There are different angles of things that we can work on top of that after we acknowledge that. We never get it. We already give up of getting, except if you're a physicist or a chemist. They take 100 years, 200 years, and you get these laws, these underlying laws, at least in the settings that causal inference folks are working. That's not gettable. 99% of the 99.9, because the phenomenon is too complicated. There are too many variables that are unmeasured. Now, and there's the human in the loop as well. That adds complexity. Now, all our inference will be assuming that these mechanisms are there, but how can you go around it? That's what I like to call causal inference. Then the first bucket that we have been doing for a long time, but it's called, can you generate explanations? Can you open this nature black box and try to understand a little bit more? Different tasks come under this rubric. One of them is effect identification and decomposition. The other is called bias analysis. There are implications now for that for something called fairness analysis. That's a hot topic in machine learning. Issues of robustness and generalizability of both causal but also statistical statements. How can you train the classifier in one setting and make the statement in the target one that is somewhat different? This is a causal inference exercise in this side. Another bucket, you could say, I couldn't care less about science, Elias, which is valid. I just want to optimize. I want to decide and keep some variable y, the outcome high, the profitability of the system, the health, the click-through rate, whatever you want, or the well-being society. Don't care about explanation, it's valid. Different tasks comes under this bucket. Reinforcement learning, the whole reinforcement learning is a decision-making exercise. Randomized controlled trials are the same way. Personalized decision-making, whatever personalized means, we can discuss. Those are there are kind of libraries or many books written about that. The take here that is quite different is like, this comes from a structural causal model. Each paper you see that this makes a lot of difference. For sure, there is some interaction. Zero explored. There's 0 papers in the literature at the moment. We have been working for a few years, but no papers. There is some relationship between that. As much as you understand the system, this should lead to better decision-making, more surgical decision-making. And as you are deciding, even if you don't know about the structure, indirectly or directly you are getting experimental data, indirectly you are learning about the system. This should lead to some understanding. How to explore that in a systematic way, we don't know yet, but it's quite interesting and promising. This is very theoretical, the first two. I'm also interested more in a couple of years, trying to apply this in practice, education and software. 2 types of applications exist. Today I discuss more about this side, the data science. You would like to be able to confidently or with a clean face say, put this label scientific. We're trying to have principal inferences from large data collection, not doing astrology, outputting anything. And the AI machine learning side that I didn't speak today much, or not in these terms, that's principles and tools for robust and adaptable and learnable system. Let me skip this one, that is things that are going on that are interesting. I'll conclude, and thanks for being flexible with the time. Causal data science, principal way of combining substantive knowledge about the phenomena under investigation with the data to generate causal explanations and better decision-making. Key observation here that is not all data is created equal. We like to move from the sentence to formal language and formal kind of inference. Most modern data collections are messy and plagued with systematic bias that needs to be understood and controlled so that causal claims can be made. Causal data science solves long-standing challenges in the sciences, including, and then you have many problems, the different names, confounding bias, that is well known, that was original causal inference, selection bias, and so on. Hope or goal here, perhaps you guys can help, because this is a life goal or target. Can you try to generate some kind of automated version of a scientist? Because we as humans, pretty strong evidence from the cognitive science department, we are pretty good in doing reasoning and extracting things from 2, 3, 4. Maybe if you are the best engineer, 7 variables. Then we can program or encode that in the system. When you operate in 1,000 variables, this will preserve the validity of the inference, even though you cannot do it. Reasoning with causal relations is part of what is called, we can discuss scientific method, and has been understood in very great generality, even though there is a lot of theory to be done as well. Now a strategy, or what we like to do, or doing already, is combining InfCI with AI ML to automate the process and try to close the scientific loop. That's the idea. I think I'm open for questions if you have time. I don't, this is codes. Thank you.